All right. Thanks, Janie. Um, and welcome everyone to the US Web Design System monthly call. For November 2024. Uh, it's almost Thanksgiving, so let's just do a classic Thanksgiving themed USWDS logo in oranges, gold, and brown. Fall foliage. Nothing too clever. Slide 2. My name's Dan Williams, he, him, and I'm the USWDS project lead. Here on screen is my avatar. Dark hair, blue sweater, collared shirt, glasses. Today, real life me is wearing an orange, red, blue, and gold plaid shirt and some green socks, about Green Cool 50. As Jeannie mentioned, we are recording this call, and I'm happy to say we've started to be able to share the recordings of these monthly calls publicly. You can find pretty much everything from the last year's worth of monthly calls back to January 2023 on our website at designsystem.digital.gov/about/monthly-calls. We typically post videos shortly after the monthly call, and we also link out to the slides in the script hosted at Digitalgov. We've also started collecting each month's Q&A as a GitHub discussion linked from the monthly calls page. We've posted a link to our monthly calls page in the chat. We'll be posting other links and references into the chat as we go along. And today we're continuing something we've been doing the last couple calls when it comes to chats and questions. Today in your Zoom window, you'll find a Q&A button in addition to a chat button, possibly under a More button. We'd like to encourage folks to ask questions in the Q&A section instead of the chat. So take a sec now to find the Q&A section, open it up. If any member of our team can answer your question in the Q&A section, we'll do so. Otherwise, there'll be some time for live Q&A at the end of the hour. But the chat is still nice too. Let's use the chat for introducing ourselves or for any other comments or discussion. So be sure to introduce yourself in the chat. It's nice to know who's here, and it's good to have you here today. For those of you who find the chat distracting, you're welcome to close or hide those discussions during the main presentation. You can reopen them later during the Q&A session at the end of the call. So thanks. And with that, let's get started with slide 3. So what's our agenda for today? Well, first we'll check out a couple featured sites and then a handful of, dare I say, exciting product updates. And then we'll get into it, building off last month's values presentation into more of what the heck we're actually doing as we look ahead to the next generation of the design system. Slide 4. We also have some Q&A. So anyhow, let's kick it off with a couple of featured sites. Sites? Boy, oh boy. Sites. Slide 5. First, ohss.dhs.gov, a site for the Office of Homeland Security Statistics. OHSS's mission is to foster transparency and data-driven Homeland Security decision-making by analyzing and disseminating timely, objective Department of Homeland Security data and statistics. The OHSS homepage is simple and solid with a set of 3 cards up in the hero section showing information related to immigration, Coast Guard maritime response activities, and emergency and disaster deployments. The palette is DHS blue and white with that nice USWDS banner, the Gov banner at the top of the page. Slide 6. Related to that Gov banner, our second featured site is standards.digital.gov, a new site for the new federal website standards. Federal website standards will help agencies provide high-quality, consistent digital experiences for everyone. The standards cover common visual and technical elements and reflect user experience best practices. And we hope to talk more about federal website standards with the standards team next month. But for now, we can just enjoy the simple content-forward homepage with a clean nav, Gov banner, light blue hero section, and the words, "Deliver consistent digital-first experiences for the public." Slide 7. So great work, y'all. Be sure to let our team know when a new site launches, either with an email or a note on the USWDS public Slack channel. Slide 8. So now for some product updates. Slide 9. So first, we are on a new monthly release cadence for USWDS releases, as we mentioned last month. And our November release is USWDS 3.10.0. Slide 10. A few notable updates to USWDS 3.10.0. The first is one I'm super happy to get out the door to folks. Based on some findings from usability testing, we updated the order of combo box search results. It's a bit of a small thing, but it has what I think is a big impact. The component now displays options that start with the query string at the top of the results list, followed by options that contain the query string. So in the old combo box, users were a bit confused when they searched for a string like MA in a group of state names and got Alabama as the first result instead of Maine, Maryland, and Massachusetts. Now you'll still get Alabama, but it'll come after all the entries that start with the string, which is, I think, a pretty nice change. We'll be testing that change some more as we move into the next few months and validating that it actually is making the good change that we think it will. We also improved the default hint text in the time picker, and we fixed a bug that caused file input image previews to break when a content security policy is enabled. And we've also included a few other small fixes you'll want to check out. Slide 11. We're working on a December release now, as well as a 1.2.1 release to USWDS compile that'll help silence some of the distracting deprecation warnings we've been seeing in our SAS compiles. We're also working to update our code to address those warnings, but it's a little bit complicated. So look for an update to compile coming soon. Slide 12. We've also released 3 new accessibility test pages: memorable date, time picker, and file input. We're rolling right along with accessibility test pages. The next up are collection, summary box, icon list, button group, and process list. Slide 13. Next, one that's been a long time coming and a few months since we first previewed it here. One of our most requested items, a USWDS design kit for Figma. Our initial beta version of this new design kit is out now, and you can find it at figma.com/community and search for USWDS, or you can follow the link in the chat. Slide 14. We're considering this a beta since it needs a bit more exposure to real world usage and probably a bit of adjustment before it's like fully ready for production use, but it's ready for its public debut, I hope. As we showed a few months back, this design kit brings the complete token library into the software as variables. We've also added a ton of documentation, even though I'm sure there's plenty of room for improvement. So we'll just keep going from here. Slide 15. What we've released includes 42 USWDS components built with USWDS design tokens, with smart layouts, custom properties, complete examples, and all the bells and whistles, I think. Slide 16. So as I said, it's in public beta now and available for anyone to download now. I'm really happy to finally have it out in the world, and if there's interest, perhaps we can talk more about it, do a deeper dive sometime in the new year. Slide 17. In the world of USWDS discussions, we've got a couple things to highlight this month. We've got an active discussion about a spinner component proposal and an active pattern proposal about pre-filled information, as well as a discussion about using USWDS in a Next.js app with server-side rendering, and another about inclusive experiences beyond visual design. We'd love to hear from folks on our accessibility discussion for November, an auto-completely useful WCAG technique. And we've also posted the transcript to October's monthly call, including answers to questions we didn't get to in that month's call. Bonus content. Slide 18. And as we've been saying for the last few months, next month will be the last month for the V1 documentation site before its final sunsetting. So be sure to stop by and say your goodbyes before the end of the year. And again, if you are using V1 Docs site for something, let us know, and we can make sure that any critical content is something that we're able to keep in some way or another. Slide 19. And finally, one important change about our GitHub repos and contribution that will get into that. This will get into our contributing docs soon, but we wanted to tell you about it first. We're implementing some new controls in our repos, and one of the new requirements is signed commits. If you've ever looked at a GitHub commit timeline and seen the commits with a verified label, that's what a signed commit looks like. It's just one way we can be more proactive in understanding the provenance of our code in our project, which is notably important to public, distributed, and open source projects like ours. We're posting the instructions for adding GitHub code signing in the chat. Notably, I believe any commits initiated through the GitHub web interface will be signed by default, I think. So that can be a good option for simpler contributions, and if you don't want to learn how to set up SSH or GPG on your computer. If you don't have signed commits, we can't merge your code. So set it up if you haven't already, and it's just a good practice. Slide 20. So today we wanted to spend some time talking about the next generation of the design system. We've spent a bunch of time talking about our work with web components over the last many months, but what does that mean for the rest of the code base and what we're planning to deliver next spring? Slide 21. Joining me today are my colleagues Matt and Anne. First, Anne Petersen, our experienced design lead. Anne, can you introduce yourself and give a self-description for anyone audio only?
Absolutely. I'm Anne. My pronouns are they, them. And visually, I'm white with short brown hair. The front's a little mussy and the sides are very short, with small glasses and headphones in a mustard yellow flannel. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Anne. Nice flannel. Slide 22. And next, I'd like to introduce Matt Henry, our engineering lead. Matt, can you introduce yourself and give a self-description for anyone audio only?
Sure thing. Thanks, Dan. Hello, I'm Matt. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a bald white man with a close-cropped white beard, glasses, and today I'm wearing a solid dark green shirt. Back to you, Dan.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. We will hear from Matt and Anne in a sec. But first, I wanted to set the stage for what we're talking about with a little bit about slide 23, tension and change. Slide 24. We've talked a lot in the last year about the inevitability and the importance of change from the perspective of what a design system is meant to support and what a design system is meant to do. Slide 25. We're trying more and more to be practical, but also take a long view of the design system, trying to imagine both the design system and the teams that use it many years down the road. Does thinking about using USWDS in 10 years or 20 years sound good? Does it still sound vital? Or does that sound like a terrible nightmare or a millstone? Like, why? What might that tell us about what the design system should be and how it should be? Slide 26. In a positive view of the future, we see our key to success as adaptation. That's why it takes the lead in our product values. Design is adaptation. We just have to continue to make it work. Slide 27. And how we make it work is by helping you adapt, helping you do design work, and trying to learn from that. Slide 28. And that certainly sounds nice. But perhaps the reality of adaptation is tension, of conflicting expectations, red in tooth and claw. Slide 29. There's a tension between difference and commonality, between individual identity and group identity. How much should our sites and services look and behave like one another? When does commonality positively affect user experience? When does it negatively affect user experience? Slide 30. Similarly, there's a tension between customization, which we might think of as like just making whatever types of changes to design system components, and configuration, making only certain types of changes. What constraints are healthy constraints? Do we all have to play by the same rules? Slide 31. And then there's a tension between present needs and future needs. In the present, like we want that faster horse, and we want the thing done. And we don't really care about tech debt, not yet at least. The future is unknowable, right? Slide 32. Tension can read as negative, as simply stress. But what if we just add the word dynamic? Still stressful, but maybe productive. This tension can sometimes be a tool. Slide 33. When we're thinking about the future of USWDS, we have to engage with these tensions because we know we have to change and keep changing. We know that the USWDS code base is showing its age. In fact, 2025 will be the design system's 10th birthday. Slide 34. And when we think about the future of USWDS, we think about what folks need to know to use the design system. Are these the skills folks still want to learn? What's part of our core identity? SAS, BEM, HTML, CSS? Slide 35. When we think about the future of USWDS, we want to keep a good tangible goal in mind, like this variant of our Polestar, to make it easier to adopt the design system and stay up to date. Slide 36. And as we listen to folks, we understand that folks use the design system in all kinds of ways. Slide 37. Whose way is the right way? Who's to say? 38. Slide 38. And is there a way to plot a path ahead that acknowledges all these tensions and seeming impossibilities, but has an opinion and isn't just gormless and wishy-washy? Anne, how can we begin to do this?
Thanks, Dan. This is Anne. When we think about shaping the future of our design system, it's worth considering design systems essentially as applied philosophy. Slide 40. There are values made tangible. Slide 41. There are values made practice. Slide 42. They're how we perceive the world and make our corner of it better by centering the people we serve. Slide 43. We learn more about both broad layers of people that use the design system. You, the teams who make use of what we make, and the public, or the people using what you make out of what we make. In the process of learning about both, we adapt and evolve. Each of those changes inform the next changes. And all that we've learned informs our kind of supporting core concepts like mission, vision, and Polestar. Slide 44, our mission, as a reminder, shaping the future of government services. Slide 45, our vision, empowered and supported digital service teams, familiar and easy to use digital services. Slide 46, and our Polestar, we help government teams align, design, and keep their websites and services up to date. Slide 47, and these lead to our values. On the product side here, that design is adaptation, compliance is our baseline. We strengthen connections, get to easier earlier, and need to be a good steward. Slide 48. And on the engineering side, we embrace the platform. We support user experience with developer experience. We remember that we're a layer, and we write plain language code. These are core concepts we can rely on and refer back to when we're making decisions. The design system becomes our values made tangible. Slide 49. So to go back to basics, to think about all of this way to support everyone and build in a logical, scalable way, I went back to the original, the first web page of the World Wide Web. Slide 50. Like the USWDS, the World Wide Web itself is in the public domain. Hey, us too. In accordance with the values that we just set out. In 1993, CERN allowed everyone to use the World Wide Web created there. Slide 51. Here's the memo from CERN, though I wasn't intending for you to read it here. It's got pretty small memo text with some red seals. And it notes here that permission is granted for anyone to use, duplicate, modify, and redistribute it. And CERN of the modern day notes that that page reflected CERN's core values of open collaboration for the benefit of society, which sounds a lot like a mission statement too. Slide 52. Here's what that original web page looked like. Plain text, links, simple. Slide 53. It's actually more like this at the time. So here you can see the page building line by green line on its black background in the line mode browser simulator that CERN created for the 30th anniversary of the World Wide Web's creation. What's out there is the first kind of like menu item here. Slide 54. And this original web page was fairly meta. It referenced itself, self-documented itself, and provided entry and exit points. It contained information about itself and how to do what it does, so it could be built upon and evolved upon into the future. And to some extent, that's the basis of design systems in general and how they also work. It also shows how your values and mission make your system more anchored, much like how we're working. Slide 55. So my point here is that what we've done in comparison also has a through line to what we intend to do and beyond. It makes sense. It builds upon itself. Slide 56. I'm not trying to say that we're just like the original World Wide Web itself. That sounds a little hubrisy, but we do share a belief in our work being open and available and flexible and remixable, modifiable, replaceable, exchangeable, ultimately modular. The flexibility to pick and choose what you use and don't, alongside what you build to be more specific to your use case, as opposed to the kind of closed garden, only one way to do it kind of tendency that's the case on the web in many places. The design system needs to be operable in as many places as possible. So staying closest to the web platform, for example, is our best call to be future facing. And we think that will help you in using it. Slide 57. So you can anticipate some of the decisions we might make if you know our values. If you know one of our values is staying as close as possible to the basic foundation of the web, you can probably guess where we're going and make your own decisions accordingly, even if we haven't necessarily made that call yet. But also you can certainly just ask us. That's what we're here for every month. Now, to break down the pieces of the decisions we've made recently, outlining the shape of this next generation of the system, and more importantly, to bring it all back together, I'm going to pass it back over to Dan.
Thank you, Anne. This is Dan again. Slide 58. Since we're bringing it all back together, I'd like to call this next section United. Slide 59. To understand where we're going, it'll be helpful for us and for you to understand what we're hearing in the many conversations we've had with teams and individuals about adopting USWDS and about web component technology. Slide 60. As we've covered in extensive, perhaps tedious detail over the last year, we've talked about how teams integrate the USWDS HTML and CSS spec into application templates, and how the sometimes complex and brittle structure of this core code base can lead to a lot of downstream effort, manually keeping up to date with changes from USWDS release to release. This is the story of web components, how we intend to both simplify a component's API surface and deliver a component that requires less maintenance and fewer dependencies to integrate into a project. Slide 61. And we've also talked about the tension and trade-offs involved in using USWDS web components. The benefits we've mentioned, simplicity and maintainability, do come at the expense of flexibility. Because web components do more of the work themselves, they leave fewer choices available to designers and developers. They have opinions. They're more prescriptive about what they can and can't do, about what functionality they support. And they may not be your project's opinions. In some cases, this can mean that the component cannot do what you need it to do, or what your USWDS-based project code currently does. Slide 62. For all its complexity, traditional HTML and CSS has an incredible amount of power in its customizability. And this customizability has been at the core of our product's value proposition since the beginning. Adopt and adapt is one of our longtime messages, and one that's central to our product value of design as adaptation. Slide 63. Web components do make this value proposition more complicated. Slide 64. When we talk to teams, this is generally what we hear. Like, a simpler way to use USWDS is great. A simpler way to do what we need to do is great. But a simpler way to do something different from what we're doing is not great. In fact, it would be a big, big problem. Web components are great until they aren't great. And then they're the problem. They're a potential blocker and a bottleneck, and countless time-consuming discussions and arguments up and down the product and agency. And given the choice, teams may just not use them. And that's understandable. The mission and the audience comes first. And these are teams that currently use USWDS HTML and CSS. These are mature teams maintaining mature products. These are teams that value their ability to use human-centered design to meet the needs of their audience, which I hope we all try to do. Slide 65. When it comes to shaping the future of government digital services, we already see the potential existential risk of building a design system that cannot change and adapt. We see it from both sides, in the cascading maintenance burden of making necessary breaking changes to our core code base. And we see it in the opinionated constraints of a simplified solution stifling necessary adaptation. Slide 66. Since some amount of effort is necessary on both paths, the sort of CSS path and the web components path, and both paths are useful, for us, the best resolution to this situation is to continue to improve both ways of using the design system by reducing the costs and risks of each over time. And on a case-by-case, component-by-component basis, teams can make the call about which set of costs and constraints is right for their team and project. Slide 67. So teams have asked, as we've moved toward web components, what's going to happen to the USWDS 3 code base? Some of you have asked that question in our Q&As. Well, not only do we plan to continue and maintain it, but we expect a long-term technical integration between USWDS web components and USWDS core HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Specifically, we see web components as something of a simplified API wrapper around USWDS core HTML. When you use a USWDS web component, it should render USWDS core HTML, CSS to the browser. In this model, you can't have the web component without also bringing this core along for the ride. Slide 68. So we expect to see both products co-evolving together into the foreseeable future. The core HTML, the web components. Slide 69. And as we take a look at how this would work, I'd like to try to simplify the discussion with some new terms. We're now talking about two interrelated USWDS products, web components-based USWDS components, and our non-web component, traditional HTML, CSS, JavaScript code base of components for the web, the set of components we now call USWDS 3. That's a lot of words, and most of them are web or component, and they're both USWDS. Slide 70. So from now on, we're going to call the web component product USWDS elements, or just elements. Slide 71. And we're going to call the non-web component code base, USWDS 3, USWDS core. Slide 72. The key benefit of USWDS elements is simplification and encapsulation. They're like a little seed, allowing folks to take USWDS core code anywhere and add it to a site with nothing more than minimal markup and a JavaScript file, like a little USWDS Johnny Appleseed. no necessary compiling, less code on the page, fewer user-facing markup changes over time. You could imagine adding new styling configurations to an elements component that might not affect the core code base, like a component-specific way to add a custom color or border radius to the element, which would be a trivial change using either custom CSS or a utility class in core. And you could imagine making a structural change to core that would not really affect elements, like potentially changing the markup of a core accordion to a summary details pattern. And you could imagine changes that could affect both, like adding a new content element into link that might help indicate the type of link, or information about the size of a file for download. In that instance, both elements and core would have to change. But wherever they go, they'll go together. Slide 74. The creation of core and elements as two distinct but integrated products means, ironically, that we don't have to bifurcate the product from a documentation perspective. There's no old USWDS and new USWDS. While there are distinctions in the Elements API interface, they're both doing the same kinds of things under the hood. We introduce core and elements, but maintain a united USWDS in the docs. And this united USWDS will be important because we see many ways to use USWDS. Maybe only elements, maybe only core, or what we consider most common, especially earlier in our release cycle, a mix of both. Slide 75. This relationship will also affect how we use design tokens in the code base. USWDS core is built on Sass functions and mixins. USWDS elements needs to incorporate CSS custom properties to work natively. And teams will want to use whichever flavor of token makes the most sense for them, possibly in the same product. Not to mention having tokens that integrate into non-CSS environments like design software variables or native applications. Slide 76. So this leads us to a third new USWDS product, USWDS tokens. Slide 77. USWDS tokens is the logical endpoint for our work converting tokens into a canonical JSON data format. In the new model, Sass, CSS variables, design software variables, other outputs would be considered targets for token data, and we'd be developing plugin converters for the JSON data to fit those targets. Elements and core would both consume USWDS tokens, but consume different output from that single source. You could even imagine some teams using USWDS tokens, just tokens, but not using either core or elements, only for styling in a custom code base, similar to how one might use a product like Open Props. The USWDS token data itself wouldn't change very frequently, but there'd be plenty of opportunities for improvements like new converters or perhaps performance-focused subsetters that output only the tokens necessary for a specific USWDS configuration. USWDS tokens could also allow for long requested features like JSON or YAML-based USWDS configuration files. Tokens need the opportunity and really have the opportunity to evolve separately from something CSS or Sass specific. Slide 78. So our new product model so far features USWDS elements, the web components, USWDS core, the CSS HTML, and USWDS tokens. There's all kinds of modular functionality you could imagine as additional standalone integrated products. For instance, we're currently discussing how USWDS might integrate with internationalization via translation objects called PO files for common microcopy strings. But there's a fourth product we see the opportunity to introduce alongside elements, core, and tokens next year. And that's splitting out USWDS utilities. Slide 80. We introduced utilities, static token-based single-purpose classes used for rapid prototyping and targeted stylistic interventions that don't require modifying CSS in USWDS 2.0. And they're another part of the product that nobody wants to see go away, as we also pursue web component-based USWDS elements. But utility classes in USWDS, they are a little clunky. They were and are a nice addition that still makes a lot of sense, but are significantly less sophisticated than purpose-built utility class libraries like Tailwind. They could be more flexible, more specific, more performant, faster to compile. If you've seen the USWDS Tailwind project developed by a community member, you see what a more modern version of USWDS utilities could do. More and more, we're starting to see utilities as conceptually similar to USWDS tokens, something that's primarily data. And just with tokens, there's a lot of power in treating that data as a source and specific outputs as targets. You can imagine USWDS utilities compiling from JSON to exactly the utility classes we now support, but separate from the USWDS compile process. You could also imagine combining USWDS utilities and USWDS tokens into a config that uses a third party like Tailwind to do the utility class building, as in USWDS Tailwind. Slide 81. Treating the USWDS monolith, the current USWDS monolith, as separate interrelated products will allow each domain to evolve at its own pace. We don't know yet which will move fastest or how, but we know that we want to be clear about how each is changing, reflecting our value of working in the open. Slide 82. This is why as we move into this model, we want to lean into semantic versioning. Communication is going to be critical for teams to know what's changing and how it will affect them. When one of these products has a breaking change update, we should convey that information in the version number. You shouldn't have to pore over each set of release notes to know whether you need to pay attention to an individual release. The version number should just tell you. We expect elements to have fewer breaking changes than core as we move forward. We expect tokens and utilities to have relatively few breaking changes once they get established. This should also be reflected in their versioning. You'll see our major version numbers go up faster in some USWDS products than others. Slide 83. So what is USWDS 4.0? The simple answer is that there will be no USWDS 4.0, at least nothing called USWDS 4.0. Slide 84. Instead of USWDS 4.0, we're introducing this new model of USWDS for interrelated products. USWDS Core 4.0. The next version after USWDS 3x, the core HTML CSS that powers our components. USWDS Elements 1.0, a simplified API wrapper for USWDS Core, encapsulating USWDS components, starting with those directly connected to federal web standards. USWDS Tokens 1.0, the USWDS visual language, able to target multiple outputs across devices and platforms. And USWDS Utilities 1.0, a powerful styling and prototyping tool for use with or without USWDS Core. And it's all just USWDS. This is a new generational model that, instead of calling USWDS 4, internally we call United. Slide 85. This united model of USWDS has incredible promise for supporting multiple ways of working, multiple models of team collaboration and modes of building, and multiple types of simultaneous change. But it will require real work, not only in communication, but in structuring and scoping our work. And for more on that, I'll pass it over to Matt.
Thanks, Dan. This is Matt. So let's talk about how we're going to make this work. We're still working out details, but what Dan outlined is the big picture. On the engineering side, we're thinking through how teams will be using a combination of these products, what infrastructure and refactoring we need to support to interoperability between these upcoming USWDS products, and what we'll prioritize as we think about getting it all done. Slide 88. From a Usage perspective, we imagine the most common scenario will be mix and match, with teams selecting the product mix that's best for their team skills and their product. We tend to think that teams will want to evaluate elements first. Slide 89. We're designing elements to be a starting point. If an elements component meets your team's needs, you're good to go. With elements, we're working on striking the right balance between power and ease of use so that these components should work for lots of teams a lot of the time. Slide 90. For teams comfortable with the functionality of an elements component, but having an existing infrastructure based on a different component API, we're building elements to be extensible and interoperable with any web components library. So teams can add a custom API wrapper on top of the elements component to help it better fit into an existing code base. And they'll still be able to take advantage of the improved stability and maintainability of the USWDS element under the hood. Slide 91. But just in case your project needs more configurability than an elements component is going to offer out of the box, you can always eject to the core component and customize it as much as you need to using the same ways you're already used to. Many teams will be able to use USWDS elements for entire projects, but because elements and core both use web standard technologies, you'll be able to mix and match on a component by component basis. Supporting this way of working is going to require a fair bit of refactoring under the hood of what we're now calling USWDS core. Slide 92. Right now, even though USWDS is broken up into several packages, users still have to import pretty big chunks of the design system at a time in order for things to work as expected. We need to make the core code base significantly more modular so you'll be able to add only the components you need, whether those are core components or elements, and make sure the scripts and styles that are required to make those components work are as lightweight as we can make them. Slide 93. Part of this move towards greater modularity is going to involve a slight conceptual reframe in how each product in the USWDS family relates to each other. As Dan alluded earlier, I think of these relationships as being between tools and targets. Slide 94. Right now, a lot of the logic for how styles, tokens, and utilities work is implemented in Sass. Our team authors styles in CSS, and that makes the Sass dependency a critical one for many teams that use USWDS. And it also imposes yet another dependency for some kind of tool to build that Sass when you need it. You might use USWDS compile for this, or you might have another build tool that does this for you. Slide 95. Eventually, we want to reorient that relationship a bit. At some point in the medium to long term, we'll author styles directly in web standard CSS. This goes back to some of what we talked about in the October monthly call regarding leveraging the web platform. Slide 96. But I hasten to add, this doesn't mean we're going to stop supporting Sass. If you like your Sass, you can keep your Sass. However, one outcome of this reorientation will be that Sass SCSS is going to be one target among many of the USWDS tokens package. So tokens will have the existing design tokens in a more technology agnostic format, and that will be able to be output into multiple other formats. So tokens is one tool that can have many possible targets, such as Sass variables, CSS custom properties, potentially even utility classes or other formats like colors for native mobile operating systems. Slide 97. How is this change going to affect you? Importantly, we don't want to introduce significant breaking changes as we move from USWDS 3 to Core 4. We believe a lot of the necessary refactoring will not have an impact on you. We won't be changing class names or markup in this version bump, or if we do, we'll keep it as tightly scoped as we can. Slide 98. Since one of the goals of USWDS elements is to reduce the development impact of breaking changes, we want to make sure we introduce an elements version of a component before we consider making significant breaking changes to it on the core side. Slide 99. Continuity matters to us. The code you rely on will still be here. We're just working to make things easier, more modular, and less opinionated for you and your teams. There will be changes and there will be bumps, but our new structure is meant to minimize them. Slide 100. So what can you expect going into 2025? We'll work to release what we can as soon as we can. We're biased towards shipping early so you can test sooner rather than later. Slide 101. We'll work to keep things clear and simple as we can make it. We intend that to be our method of operating going forward in the interest of our value of working in the open. We've started documenting big changes and the rationale behind them in architectural decision records in the USWDS proposals repository. You can see ADRs for the choice to build with web components, as well as the choice of lit as the library we're using to help author those components. Going forward, we're going to keep adding ADRs for consequential choices that we make, including the ones we've been talking about on the call today. And that's how we're thinking about this new generation of USWDS from an engineering perspective. Back to you, Dan.
Thank you, Matt. Slide 102. I'll finish with a little bit about what to expect in 2025. Slide 103. It's interesting. This is both a, not so much of a big change and also like a really big change for USWDS. Talking with teams about web components really made a big impact on how we're approaching this transition. So thanks for all you've shared so far, and probably for all you'll continue to share as we move forward. I don't think our current outcome is one I would have predicted going into the process. And I think we're really focused on the future these days and trying to prepare for the reality of change, as well as how we can prepare you for that reality as well. This shifts our focus towards sustainable infrastructure changes and a model of the design system that we believe will be both more modern and more resilient. Slide 104. But it is a priority shift. We're going to be putting more and more time into the product model and its interoperability, and less time into more web components. But I think this is because we're committed to making this work long term and work well release by release. Slide 105. So as we look forward to our target date of spring 2025, here's what we hope to deliver. USWDS Core 4.0, focusing on interoperability with elements and tokens without affecting existing styles, markup, or SaaS-based tools. USWDS Elements 1.0, a small selection of components prioritizing those aligned with current pending federal website standards and draft standards, which as of now include banner, identifier, and search. Beyond that, we'll look to launch with a set that begins to be usable for forms. Since we're focusing on simplification for USWDS elements, we're trying to launch with the most simple components, which teams typically don't need to configure as much, like form fields, instead of header and navigation elements. USWDS Tokens 1.0, a style dictionary-based collection of USWDS design tokens that can power existing SaaS in USWDS Core and any token-based needs for our launch of elements. And USWDS Utilities 1.0, likely launching with a straightforward port of the existing SaaS-based system into a standalone repo. And for website and documentation, we're working on incorporating all this new product information with a strong focus on improving how we communicate what's new, what's changing, and what's ahead. We want our website to be a practical way to get up to speed on what's going on with USWDS, in addition to all our current guidance, technical docs, etc. Slide 106. And that's where we see the next generation of the design system, starting in spring 2025. Not old USWDS and new USWDS, rather, a united USWDS moving forward.